Based upon the data that is currently available, it is impossible to distinguish Set from Shem. It appears impossible to separate the two. What that also means is that it is impossible to remove Set from Scripture. And so the way that Scripture is laid out, Set is essential to Scripture. This is problematic for so many reasons. If you have been doing some research, you have perhaps noted this and you see the difficulty, the impossibility of this particular situation of Set being so foundational. However, what's noteworthy is that Set's name means foundation. That's one of the translations of Set. Ergo, it's one of the translations of Shem and a number of other entities throughout Scripture. What we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the dynamics related to Set and Shem, and then we're going to look at why, in terms of translation, Set is synonymous with Shem. And so it's important to keep in mind that these three entities are the same. So when you see Set, it's the same as Seth, it's the same as Shem. Now, in terms of transliterations, you might see it looking different in different languages, but it's incumbent upon you to figure out when you are looking at a translation or a transliteration of that Egyptian Set. It's also important to keep in mind these symbols that you see on the screen that are related to the identity of Set. And so these are sort of his calling cards or its calling cards, because it's not completely clear that Set is a traditional male entity. Set isn't even supposed to be a human entity. Set is a chimera in so many different ways. Another important notation related to Set or Seth or Shem is that this entity is primordial. We're going to look at some literature that talks about Set actually predating that narrative about Isis or Isis and Osiris. So there's a little bit more going on with Set or Set in terms of the timeline. And again, Set is being presented as primordial. In other words, from the beginning. And so prior to these particular narratives that you see with respect to Egyptian history or Mizraim history or biblical history. Another observation with respect to Set or Seth or Shem is this dynamic of duality. And so it looks like there are instances wherein Set presents as one thing, but simultaneously presenting as the opposite. And so it's a very interesting dynamic because often there may be an indication that Set is being manifested in a particular way, but then you see the nemesis of Set also being Set. And so it's a very interesting, confusing, chaotic dynamic going on here. And you can even see this with this depiction, wherein Set is on one side, Horus, and then the Set animal on the other side, almost like that Janus depiction, almost like the suggestion about Adam in Scripture being two-faced, being a hypocrite. And so in this way, you see Seth manifesting the same thing. There's also some indication that Set or Seth is associated with Jacob and Esau. Another notation related to Set or Seth is the manifestation of the essence of Set or Seth on the arms of this creature that you see on the screen, that Baphomet. And so you see that solve and coagula. And both of these dynamics are representative of Set, what Set is all about. And so when you see Set or Seth in action, you are typically seeing these dynamics at play. And so this is sort of the playbook for Set or Seth, this dynamic of solve, breaking things apart, calculating things, and then putting things back together. And so destruction and creation. And so that's what you see with respect to Set. Of particular note with respect to the overthrow of people is this situation wherein Set is represented as that which is the settler. So Set is involved with settling. Set is involved with replacement. So that demographic replacement dynamic that we've seen throughout history. This is a part of the nature of Set. This is the invocation of Set. And so Set, by doing all of this, by being related to all of this, is that deity of chaos, that constant upset and then ordering, then upset and then ordering. But essentially, Set is a chaos deity. And so everything about what Set is doing, according to the mythos, is about creating chaos and disorder. And so that's what you have when you have people moving all around the world, settling here, settling there, then removing certain groups of people, putting them in various places. This is a Set sort of dynamic. You saw this with the transatlantic slave trade specifically, wherein individuals were picked up in one place and then relocated to another place. And so their identities were changed. You might see this with individuals being transplanted from the mainland to one of the islands, or from the islands to the mainland, or from the northern mainland to the southern mainland, or vice versa. In some instances, coming in from Europe, in some instances, some back and forth between Europe and Africa, back and forth between America and Asia, back and forth between the Americas and Africa. And all of this is a part of the nature of Set. And the reason why this might be so prevalent is because Set is ubiquitous. And so there's a constant calling on and invoking Set in all of these dynamics. And so you see this recapitulation essentially of Set in various dynamics in various societies. It's a global dynamic. Again, Set is presented as primordial, so the beginning of time up through now, and pervasive, just everywhere all the time. Okay, and so Set in many ways is being presented as um, omnipotent and also omnipresent. Now we're going to look at some notations in this particular text called the Gods of the Egyptians. In this text, there are a number of notations that correlate Seth with Shem. And so there's this complete entanglement going on with respect to Set and Shem, or what would be considered Semitic history. Now, check this out. This is a listing of a number of important days. And you see the hieroglyphics, and then you see the wording in the middle, and then you see the translation into the English. And if you look right there in the middle at number 25, you see this Heb Setu. And if you look over to the right-hand side, what do you see? This is the day of Shem. And so the day of Shem is represented by this Heb Setu. And Setu is the word that is correlating with Shem. So that Set word is synonymous with Shem. And there's a special day associated with Shem. Now we're going to address these many names of Set coming up. But right now, it's important to remember that Set has many transliterations, and so it might not jump out at you immediately that you are looking at a transliteration or a translation of Set. But you should keep your eyes and ears open because there are so many, and there is significant interchange in terms of the consonants and in terms of the vowels. Now, many might already know that Set is another word for Typhon, and we can talk about that a little bit more also. Interestingly, Moses, this Typhon, is also seen as an alias for Moses. Yes. So we also see that with respect to Set, he has or it has other names. It goes by other names. And so one is Suti. You might also see Sut or Sod. So there are so many, and we will look at those. We already know that the number six and the word six, and sometimes the word seven, all of this is a Set. What this writing indicates is that the worship of this particular deity is much older than that system related to Osiris and Nut and Isis and Horus. And so this, again, it's indicating that this Set entity is old and beyond any of these narratives that we have been given so far. It's also indicated that Set is closely associated with Horus. In other words, when you see Horus, you see Set. And so that's also interesting to keep in mind because you see that a number of times, and the question, should come up: is Horus Set or is Set Horus? Particularly given the antiquity of Set in relation to these narratives about these other deities. And here we see some other correlations and other transliteration dynamics related to Set. And what's also interesting is that Set appears to be associated with a deity known as Bar, also Baal or Baal, and then Baal and Bar are associated with this idea of the mountain and the desert. Okay, so again, this relationship to the essence of Set. And then it's also noted that, and this is very important, and this might account for the pervasiveness of Set, is that it indicates most of the Semitic gods and goddesses, those deities, um, many of them were gods of war and gods of battle. And so there was this personification of destruction. And this seemed to be very prevalent in terms of these Semitic deities. And so that might also explain this pervasiveness again of Set, because that's what Set represents. And you do note when you are doing the research that there is this repeated narrative about deities of destruction and deities involved with war and battle. And so you see this over and over, whether you're talking about Yahweh or whether you're talking about Set, or whether you're talking about Jehovah or Ava. When you look at all of these names and these translations, you see this theme that keeps coming up related to war, destruction, battle, and chaos and storms. Okay, so you see this over and over again with these Semitic narratives in the Old Testament, and then the religions that sort of branch off from that, and also when looking at some of the dynamics in Hinduism. And so it's very important to keep in mind that many of these things look like they are different, like you are looking at different entities, but ultimately some of them appear to converge right on Set. And here we see additional connections between Set or Seth and Shem. It indicates here that the kingdom of Set was supposed to be placed in the northern sky, and that this constellation that's related to Set is symbolic of a thigh. Now, what's also interesting about this is if you recall the narrative about Jacob wrestling through the night with some entity, um, there's the symbolism of the thigh in that narrative. And of course, there are multiple narratives that associate Seth with Jacob and Esau. The description that Jacob gives about Esau is similar to the description of Set or Seth. And if you recall our earlier discussions about that description of Esau, you can see how it would neatly fit with the description or the allusions related to Set. And so there's something odd going on there also, not the least of which is the narrative related to Set and Osiris, and then Set and Horus. And so when you look at those dynamics of deception that are going on in that way, you see Set being represented by Jacob, whereas the description, the physical description of Esau, is symbolic for Set. And so there's a little bit of Jacob and Esau, flowing through this Set identity. It's also indicated here that with respect to Set and the understanding of Set in terms of how Hebrews saw things, that Set was related to these regions, related to darkness and winter. And this is associated with this name, Siphon or Sephon. And this is, again, is very similar to Seth with the PH at the end, and then also Seth with the TH at the end, and also that name Typhon. And here it's noted that Seth or Set in general was always pretty much associated with evil. However, there are times wherein, in terms of the history, where Set was seen as beneficial to some collective of people. And so, even with that identity still being seen in a positive light, or being seen as something that should be supplicated, something that should be appeased. And so, that might be where some of the worship is actually coming from. And so again, indicates this relationship between Set and Baal and Bar and Belu. Now, if you recall, there is a narrative about Bar and Barbar and Barbary and Barbados. So there is that root there of that Bar or that Bayar that is associated with Set. Now let's jump right into this dynamic wherein we see that Set and Shem are one and the same. They are the same entity. And so with this, Shem becomes elevated yet again as a deity versus simply a son of Noah, like biological son of Noah. What we find when we look at the word Shem and all of the derivatives of Shem, we see that solar worship dynamic, but we also see the essence of Set in the name. And so Shem means put, set, and place. This is the same as the meaning for Set. This is Set's name. This is the meaning of Set. And so the reason why it's not so obvious is because people are often presented with this idea of Shem mysteriously only being understood as name. Like that's the meaning of Shem is name. But there's more going on with this name, Shem. And when you dig a little deeper, what you find is Shem, Sem, and Set, or Seth. This is the same entity in terms of definition. And here you can see it a little bit more clearly. You see that Shem is uh, really pronounced shame. And then also you see that Sem, and this is related to that letter that's so flexible, that Shen letter or that Sin letter. But this is essentially the lettering for Shem. And when you look at Seth or Sheath or Set, you see the similarities there. And so, in order to remind you about these similarities, what you see here is the summary, this etymology of Seth. And what you see right at the top is the meaning: set, appointed, foundation, from this idea of to set or place firm. This is also related to the idea of throne. And so this dynamic of seat is a part of the name Seth or Set. This name means so many things. It's quite incredible. But this is what we have here. So you see this set, place, appoint, foundation. And that's what we have with Set. That's what we have with Shem. And what you see here at 7760 Strongs, this is in the Hebrew, is this Sem or Sum, meaning put, place, set. So we just keep seeing this over and over again with respect to this name Shem and with respect to the name Set or Seth. And here you see again Sem, to put, place, set, yet again. One of the reasons why it gets a little confusing is that there is a little play going on with respect to the spellings with these S sounds. And so sometimes different letters are used to represent S, that S sound or that sh sound. And so therefore it's confusing because people don't automatically recognize it when they see these different letters. They don't necessarily immediately recognize that it's basically the same word with the same sound. And so you see this over and over with the Sem, Shem, Set, Sheath, Sheet dynamic. And so what we see here again is put, place, set, and then also in the Assyrian, Samu, fix or determine. Now that fix and determine, that's related to that construct of coagula, something that is fixed, something that is set. What you see is that set up, something that is congealed. So you also have put in place again, and also insert or sheath. And here you see some other notations. Again, you see that put, place, and set, but you also see it in reference to things like a crown on the head. And remember, part of the essence of these set constructs, the essence involves that flaming crown letter, that sin or shin. And here you see some additional notations. In addition to the put, lay, and set, you see this idea in scripture of lay violent hands on, render glory, related to setting laws, related to, get this, God as moral ruler. And so there are a number of instances wherein you see this interesting correlation between the construct of God and the construct of Sem or Shem. And what this also suggests is that when individuals or collectives are identifying very strongly with Sem or Shem, they are identifying with this deification dynamic. And here we see some additional dynamics related to Shem. Again, just as with Set, we see that this name translates as appointed and assigned, established, formed, and made. This is related to Adam and Esau. Okay. Also, this idea of hunting and imposing and invoking or inserting. What really stands out is over on the left-hand side, disguises. And so part of the essence of this name or this identity is this dynamic of the disguise. So let's switch over here back to this dynamic of Shem being simply understood as name. And so you see this here with the lettering Shem translating as name. But what we're going to see is that Shem is translating again as a bit more than simply name. And here we see as an adjective that Shem is essentially set, put, placed, laid, and imposed. And so, of course, with respect to set, you see these various impositions. And then with respect to the removal of people, transplanting of people, you see this superimposition that goes on with these set dynamics. But what's important to keep in mind right here is set and Shem are one and the same. This is the same word, essentially. And here you see additional information about this construct of Shem. Again, to put, place, set, appointed, settled, fixed. This is that coagula again. Another interesting notation is this idea of he turned into and transformed. And so this, of course, is tied to that idea of disguise. It's unclear about what that's all about exactly, but of course you hear a number of narratives in scripture where individuals are being disguised as something other than what they are. You see this with Abraham with Sarah, that game that went on. And part of Sarah's name also is related to this idea of turning. You also see this, of course, famously with Jacob and Esau. But you see it a number of times in scripture, this whole idea of transformation and presenting as something that one is not. Okay, so it goes on to indicate was put, was placed, and these are in various languages. To establish, put, place again. And then when you go down further, you see this Akkadian of shamu, to fix, determine, and then base. Okay, so that base means multiple things. In some ways, it means a foundation, but then in other ways, it means some of that raw stuff that you read about Set, him being base or it being base. You also see that Shem, now remember, we're talking about Shem here, even though all of this applies to Set. And so with Shem, you also see he inserted sheath and computed. Okay, that computed is related to that one arm on the Baphomet that has solve on it. And so this idea of calculating something. And so again, you see this relationship between Set or Seth and Shem and Therion.